Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I am doing a February wrap-up, beginning with a couple books I actually missed in my January wrap-up. The first book is Reading Lolita in Tehran by, I don't know the author offhand, by Azar Nafizi? I don't know. So this is a book off the top 1000 list, 1000 Books to Read Before You Die by James Mustich. I had never heard of it before. Now, this book, the title is an obvious reference to Lolita by Nabokov, which is another book on the top 1000 list. That book I pretty much refuse to read because the plot of Lolita is basically this uncle, this like, I don't know how old he is, like 45 years or whatever. He basically molests and rapes his niece who is, I don't know how old, like 12 or something. And that's really the whole book, is just him molesting and raping her. And I'm just like, nope, I don't want to read that. I saw this book, Reading Lolita in Tehran, at the library, so I was like, that's a top 1000 book, so I need to read it anyway. So I got it. I started reading it, I think back in either January or December. And after reading the first chapter, or the first 3 chapters or so, I thought this was a definite 5-star book. In fact, I tweeted the author and basically said, you know, I'm reading Lolita in Tehran. This is a masterful beginning. I just love that beginning. One of my favorite beginnings, like, ever. So that gave me real high hopes for the book. However, that was really the high point of the book. Everything from then on did not live up to that. Part of my problem with the book was basically half of it was just description. And if you've seen my channel before, you may know I don't like much description in novels because I think it's just a lot of useless details. In this book particularly, it would have these passages like this girl was wearing blue and this girl was wearing green and this girl was wearing pink. And I could understand why that would be important given the setting and whatever, like, you know, just having vibrant colors. That'd be more meaningful in Tehran than it would be like elsewhere. So I get that, but it was just going in one ear and out the other. I didn't know like who these girls were, and I couldn't remember like, oh, this girl is the blue one, this one is the green one. So it was just useless in that way. So I do get the point of having those colors and description. It just wasn't doing anything for me. It wasn't making me root for the characters or care about them at all. My other problem with the book was basically the other half of the book was just like these almost like college level essays or talks or discussions about, in this case, for the first like act of the book was Lolita. And so just talking about that book and talking about Nabokov and stuff. And I'm just like, what does this really matter? It really read like it's just a college teacher, that's what the author is, who is obsessed with Nabokov just and obsessed with Lolita, just talking about it and why. And part of the book is like she explicitly says a few times, like, I'm not trying to compare us to, you know, like say we're Nabokov's Lolita, you know, I'm not trying to draw comparisons there. But at the same time, she was. She would have passages like basically saying Lolita is not a story about rape. It's a story about stolen innocence, and basically the author says, and that's what the Iranian government is stealing from us, our innocence and our freedom. So she does compare it to the book, and that part of it just feels like real self-righteous to me. I wish I could go into more detail than that and say more why I don't like that, but to put it plainly, it just wasn't working for me. So even though I loved the introduction, the first chapter or first 3 chapters, beautiful, beautifully written, perfectly written, loved it, thought it'd be a 5-star book. After that, it just didn't sustain. Everything was just like boring. So I just gave up on the book after like 70 pages or so. I forget what I rated it, either 1 or 2 stars. If I gave it 2 stars, it would have been just because of the masterful beginning. Possibly I even gave it 3 stars just for the beginning. But plainly, I just didn't like the book. So would I recommend it or not? Kind of what I would suggest is if you're at the library and you see this book, I would kind of recommend picking it up because maybe you'll like it more than I did. But am I going to tell you you should rush out and find this book? No. If you see it though, it's worth picking up. Beautiful beginning. I didn't read far enough into the book, so maybe it redeemed itself like later on, but I didn't get that long. The other book I forgot to do for the January wrap-up was The Tempest, a play by William Shakespeare, also on the top 1000 list. A few months ago, I read Richard II, which was my first Shakespeare play since high school, reading Romeo and Juliet and Julius Caesar. Reading Richard II, it really made me understand that Shakespeare was truly a genius. He was a master of English. It was just so phenomenal what he did. The lines he came up with in that play, Richard II, I was just like, this man is on another plane of existence. There's never been anyone like this guy. So I was pretty excited to read more by Shakespeare because I always kind of thought Shakespeare would just be kind of boring, like thee and thou and all this stuff. Well, I read The Tempest and I read the whole thing, and I just did not like this play at all. I could not get into it at all. Even though I finished the whole thing, I cannot really tell you anything about the play. Basically, it is about this... Well, here I go talking about the play. It is about this ship at sea, and there's like the Duke or whatever of, I think it's Genoa or Milan. I don't know, is there a difference? Milan, I think. And so there's a storm, and there's also these like supernatural creatures. I don't know exactly what they were. One of them was named Ariel, though, I think. Or maybe it's Miranda. I think it was Ariel. And so I was just picturing her as the Little Mermaid, but I don't think she's a mermaid. Anyway, so there's these supernatural creatures, and there's also this, like, king guy and his crew, and there's a storm at sea, and that's all I can tell you about the book. I don't even remember how it ended. I don't know, like, what the main plot of the book was, like, if anyone was conspiring to do anything, like to take over or whatever. I just didn't understand much of anything about this play. So, whereas Richard II at least had parts that were just beautifully written, where there'd be lines where it's like, oh man, how did he come up with that? That's brilliant. This play, it just did not have that. The most famous line in this play is what's past his prologue. And even that, it just didn't seem like it meant anything. It was just there, and it didn't make me be like, ooh, that's such a great line. I mean, it's a famous line, but in the context of where it came in the story, it was just incomprehensible. The whole thing was incomprehensible to me. So I didn't like it at all. There was nothing about it that made me think, oh man, this is a genius. Maybe Shakespeare at that time had just reached a different pinnacle of his writing, where it was like he's no longer writing for mere mortals. I don't know. But basically, the book just did nothing for me. I know some people do like this play a lot, like it's legit one of their favorite plays by Shakespeare. So in that case, you should still read it, but this would definitely not be the play I would recommend. I would recommend Richard II well before reading The Tempest, but that's just me. Rating it, since there was really nothing about the play I liked whatsoever, I think I just gave it a 1 star. It just did nothing for me at all. Okay, and next we're actually into books I read or tried to read in February, beginning with, let's go with Superman by Matt de la Pena. I read a grand total of probably 4 paragraphs of this book, and there were really 2 reasons for DNFing it. The first is, I just do not like Superman. Superman to me is the most boring superhero ever, because he's like faster than anyone, and he's stronger than anyone, and he's invulnerable to anything except this magical mumbo jumbo rock. So the guy just has no weaknesses, and all his strengths are just super strength and everything. He's basically invulnerable, invincible, and everything. So what's really the point? What risk is any kind of like robber or thug gonna pose to this guy? I mean, he's bulletproof. So I just don't like Superman. I think he's boring. You need to have a hero who has weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and being weak to kryptonite, so you have to like fly up to the sun, is just not really a good weakness to me. That's just like some made up mumbo jumbo. And it's stupid, I think, so I just don't like Superman. That was the biggest reason probably why I gave up on it. But then also reading it, real early on, I came upon a one-sentence paragraph, and I kind of flipped through the rest of the book, and pretty much every page had a one-sentence paragraph. And I just don't really like that, where it's just paragraph, 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 one-sentence paragraph, 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 one-sentence paragraph. And what these writers do, it's like they try to have something like meaningful in those one-sentence paragraphs. And I think so often it's just stupid, like the one-sentence paragraph is not really a meaningful sentence at all. But these writers, especially, this is why I don't like a lot of currently written books, it's like they try to have beats in their book. So it's, like I say, just paragraph, 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 one-sentence paragraph, or whatever. And it's just stupid to me because it's not like actually well written. And it's very formulaic, so it's just like, oh, it's time for a one-sentence paragraph. Let's see, this sentence here could be a one-sentence paragraph. And it's just stupid. It doesn't like mean anything. It doesn't develop the plot or the characters or anything. I think it's just stupid. So one-sentence paragraphs, when they're used so often, they just annoy me, and I think they're stupid. So I just gave up on the book. I didn't really want to read it. Now, for this book, I am leaving it unrated because I just did not really give it well enough of a chance. Basically, I didn't really want to read it. I just bought it for the autograph. So, yeah, I'm done with it. The other book, and I read just about the same as the previous, about 4 paragraphs or so, was Jill Shalvis' Rainy Day Friends. So I started this book, and I think it's kind of like a Robin Carr-esque book, where it's basically going to a small town and usually finding love. Well, I read another book by Jill Shalvis. I read Sweet Little Lies, and I think I read about 50% of it. And that book, the character was like, she kept alluding to this secret that she held, this secret, and kept building it up. And basically this secret that she had in that book, Sweet Little Lies, all the problems in the book could have been averted if the characters just had a 2-minute conversation. Everything would be fine. But no, they keep this secret, and it boils over, and it becomes a huge problem when it really didn't need to be at all. And so I read the back of this book just as I was beginning to read it, and once again, this book mentions a secret in the past that will come out. So this just seems to be a theme for the writer, and having read Sweet Little Lies, or part of it, and just being so underwhelmed by that secret, it just feels so completely forced, manufactured tension. Like, just have a 2-minute conversation with the people. It's probably not even your fault, and everything would be fine. It'd be fine, but no, they're going to keep these secrets and blow everything way out of proportion. And it's just stupid to me. It's manufactured tension. So I just didn't like it. I didn't really want to read it. Again, I just bought this book for the autograph. So I tried a few paragraphs of it, but I just didn't really want to read it. So same thing, I'm not rating this book. I just don't really want to read it. By the way, in case you're wondering, I am wearing a Taco Bell shirt. I just got this a few weeks ago. Taco Bell has a surprisingly good vegetarian menu, so I wouldn't have thought of that when I became vegetarian last year in June. I thought, well, I definitely can't go to Taco Bell anymore, but they have a lot of vegetarian options. It's pretty cool. So Taco Bell is one of the few restaurants I can actually go to and have more than just like fries or a salad. The next book, also a DNF, is Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. Put that up there so I don't have to hold it the whole time. So Ayn Rand, basically people seem to have one of 2 opinions about her. Either people hate her or love her. And these are not just mild feelings of love or hate. I mean, people like go crazy about Ayn Rand, either loving or hating her. So I like quite a few like right-wing thinkers, I guess, like Bastiat, Hayek a little bit. I especially like Milton Friedman, and also Ayn Rand. So my introduction to Ayn Rand was actually reading this book, Ayn Rand Capitalism, The Unknown Ideal. This is just a collection of essays by different writers, including Ayn Rand, about capitalism and individualism. And I really like this a lot, so it's very influential for me. So I like this. I had a good opinion of her. However, I was never really felt like obsessed with Ayn Rand. Like some people would almost have like this cult following of her. I've never felt that way. So for me personally, it's like I liked Bastiat more, and also Milton Friedman. I watched like a lot of Milton Friedman videos. I didn't ever go out and just look for like everything Ayn Rand has written or said. I thought she was just a real good writer about capitalism especially. Starting Atlas Shrugged, which is her most controversial work. My first thought, of course, was this book is probably just too long. It's like 1,200 pages and small font. So that is definitely an issue. However, as I started to read it, I was actually really impressed with her writing. And for whatever reason, I started the book years ago, like in 2017. I put it down after reading just like 50 pages. And when I picked it up again last year, I was really surprised with her actual writing. She's just a real good writer. The writing was just beautiful in a way. It was magnificent. So that was making me think this could actually be really good. However, what Ayn Rand would do in this book is she would switch from this like real literary writing quality, like just beautiful writing, into these like political tirades where she would often just have someone say something that she wants to, how do I say? It's hard to describe exactly unless you've read it, but basically all of a sudden these characters will just start having this political conversation, and it's really obvious what Ayn Rand is doing, why she's doing this, the point she is trying to make. She is really overt about it. There is no subtlety to it at all. Really over the top. Clearly, it reaches points where Ayn Rand is basically like, and this is where I'm going to inject this political message about this particular issue. And she really just hammers it home. So even though I've read Ayn Rand and I like her views on capitalism, reading these parts were just tiresome. They'd make me roll my eyes and sigh, and they just did nothing for me, even though I pretty much agreed with her and I knew what she was doing. I knew the points she was trying to make. She was just doing it in such a terrible way because it was so over the top, so blatant. And I think you can be blatant about political views. I mean, there's definitely books that have that. I mean, like George Orwell is very blatant what he's talking about in some of his books, especially Animal Farm. I love that book. But what George Orwell does not do in Animal Farm is he doesn't try to mix in all these real overt political messages with like a literary fiction book. And that's what Ayn Rand tries to do. In other words, she tries to write this like literary classic, like on par with like Gone with the Wind, just real beautifully written story. And then she throws in these political tirades that are just really over the top, blatant, almost cartoonish. Because of that, it just completely ruins any kind of immersion into the story. So it's like, what is Ayn Rand trying to do? Is she trying to write a serious novel, a serious work of literary fiction? Or is she trying to do this political hit piece? You could do a political hit piece, but it just doesn't really belong in literary fiction. If you do want to write a political hit piece in literary fiction, make it more interwoven into the story, more natural. That is not what Rand does. She just like blatantly puts it out there, and it just does not fit. It does not flow whatsoever. So I thought that was just bad. So I think you can write a good political work of literary fiction, and you could write a political hit piece, kind of like on par with Animal Farm. You cannot really do both at once, or if you can, Ayn Rand, I think, did not either have the talent or the know-how to do that, or maybe she just didn't do it in this book. One way or the other, though, this is simply not it. So I think Ayn Rand is a gifted writer. Her writing is quite beautiful and impressive, one of the more better writers I've found. I also agree with her politics, but mashing them together, it just didn't work for her. I don't think she basically had the talent to pull that off, or she didn't pull it off in this book. So I'm not speaking as someone who just hates Ayn Rand and wants to crap over everything she's done. I actually like her writing, and I like a lot of her politics. However, I just didn't really like this book. I think if she wanted to have it be a work of literary fiction, it'd be fine. It'd be a beautiful book, really. I do think it should have been about 400 or 600 pages shorter. And you could do that just by cutting out all of the political crap that she throws in, or weaving them into the story a lot better. Either way, the book could be at least like 400, 600 pages shorter and still be a work of literary fiction on par with like Gone with the Wind, and it'd be beautiful. Or the other thing Ayn Rand could have done is just take the certain political parts and just have them in essay form. Like Bastiat, I think, had his candlemaker petition. That's a pretty funny story. But Ayn Rand could have done something like that, and that way she could have her political hit pieces, but not in the guise of this 1,200-page novel. It's just too long. So rating it, I just gave it 2 stars. It's actually well written. She's a good writer, surprisingly good. And I do agree with her politics, but the book just didn't work for me. It's too long, and she did not mix the politics and the literary fiction well. So I just DNF'd after about 150 pages or so. I still will try to maybe read The Fountainhead, which is another popular book by her. But same thing, if I'm just not liking that book, I may just DNF it real quick. And I know it's a pretty long book as well. Okay, the next book off the top 1000 list is Are You There, God? by... Wait. The next book also off the top 1000 list is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. So I've known about this title forever, especially from the reference in Deadpool, but I didn't know anything about it. So as I started to read, I was actually kind of surprised, like, oh, this is a children's story. That's how little I knew about it. And what's kind of funny is a day or two after starting to read it, I think I saw a trailer or a promotional image of the movie. So apparently a movie is coming out based on the book. Now, this is a pretty difficult book for me to review. First off, I did read the whole thing, so that's good. No DNF this time. Usually, I find it kind of difficult to rate young adult books because they're not for me so much. I am not the target reader. The target reader is children, our children. So the question I have to ask myself when I review books for like children, like Wizard of Oz, Charlotte's Web, and such, is not so much did I personally enjoy it, but do I think a kid or a young reader could enjoy it? Would I be fine with having my kids read this book? I don't have any kids. And it's just so hard to say for this book. So I mean, I liked it okay. There was never any part where I really wanted to DNF it, except there are parts where she prays. You know, that's where the whole Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret thing comes in. She's praying. Those were kind of tedious to me. Fortunately, they were short, like just half a page or so, but they were just so tiresome to me. When I started seeing them come at the end of every chapter, I'd just sigh and be like, oh, another one of these? I don't really want to read this again. And a lot of times they'd just be recapping what happened in the chapter, so it's like I'm not gaining any new information. So the prayers just kind of wore on me. But they weren't quite enough to want to DNF the book because they were still so short. A lot of my criticism of the book, I know it would have answers to it, like the plot of the book didn't really make sense to me, like it didn't seem like there was much of a plot. Now, of course, I know what the plot is. The book is about basically growing up and going from a girl to a woman, namely the protagonist getting her period. That's really the whole plot of the book. So it's kind of a man or woman against nature story, I guess. But through it all, there weren't really any characters or moments or themes or anything that just really meant much to me. I guess I could understand it more, especially if this is written for like a young girl who's about to go through this process. But it goes back to my question of, is this something I would recommend or support my kids reading? And really the answer would be no, because there's just a bunch of like, it's talking about the protagonist developing breasts. That's a major part of the story. Another major part is her wanting to get her period and all the girls just talking about that. And there's also talk about adult magazines. So maybe I'm just a prude here, but this is really not something I would feel comfortable like having a kid like under 12 or so read. And I know I say I'm a prude because, like, I remember things I was doing at 12. I mean, I was playing Grand Theft Auto, you know, in that game you, like, kill prostitutes with chainsaws. That's stuff that, like, 10, 12-year-olds are doing. So I understand that. They are exposed to a lot more than I think we really are willing to admit. However, would I supply my non-existent children with this book? Would I say, here, you should read this? No, not really. I'd want them to read Wizard of Oz, even though that book is real violent as well. Or Charlotte's Web, or Matilda, or whatever. Those books are all fine. This book I thought was just more adult-ish. So I don't know. Maybe just as teenagers it's more acceptable. I don't know. Again, I'm being such a prude with this probably, but in the end, still, the point is, I just didn't really feel comfortable with the book. And I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending it either. As for rating the book, usually if I finish a book, I'll give it at least 3 stars. I mean, that's the minimum. Pretty much if I finish a book, I'll actually give it 4 stars generally. However, with this book, I just don't really think there was anything particularly good about it at all. I mean, nothing. So, I mean, it's definitely not 5-star material because there's just nothing really good about the book. Is it 4-star material? I don't really think so. I mean, I just don't think there's anything to merit that. So, I give the book 3 stars. I think it is basically just what it is. It's a young adult book, and that's really it. I don't think it's real good. I don't see why it's so popular. I don't think it deserves the fame it's gotten. So if this was just like an undiscovered book, like, you know, an author's first book, maybe it has like 20 reviews or whatever, I'd probably give it 4 or 5 stars. It's not bad. But as famous as the book is, I just didn't see anything that I thought would be deserving of that level of acclaim. Maybe it's different if you're a girl who's about to go through this process, and so you can read about it and relate with it. But for me, it just didn't do anything for me, and I definitely wouldn't like rush to have my kids read it or anything. So I think the book's just 3 stars. Overall, not bad. Worth reading. It's a short read, so worth giving a shot. But as far as children's books go, this would definitely be on like the lower rankings for me. The lower tiers. There would be a lot of children's books above this. Pretty much all of them that I've read would be above this. But still, it wasn't terrible. And there was nothing about the book that I thought was actually like bad to give it like an, 1 or 2 star rating. It's just overall just an okay book, but nothing special. Next is another book off the top 1000 list, and that would be Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. So I've read a couple other books by Robert Stevenson on the top 1000 list, Treasure Island and Kidnapped. I liked Treasure Island really well. Kidnapped I thought was just okay. However, reading reviews for those books, everyone would consistently say their favorite book by Robert Louis Stevenson was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So that made me more optimistic to read it. It is also a real short book. It's only about 100 pages, 150 pages or so. So real easy read. Reading this book reminded me of 2 others, and that would be Frankenstein and Dracula. And all 3 of these books, Dracula, Frankenstein, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, are all such cultural icons. So even without seeing any of the movies, everyone pretty much knows who Dracula, Frankenstein, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are. However, a problem with that, I think, is since the story is so familiar to us, I think it's difficult to really read and appreciate a lot of these works, namely Dracula and this book as well. This was not the case for me with Frankenstein, because even though I knew the basic premise of Frankenstein, I was never like bored of Frankenstein. It was definitely a difficult read, but I enjoyed it. Dracula, I did not really, because everything that the author was trying to keep a mystery, I well knew. It's the same thing with this book. The author is trying to kind of keep this mystery of who Dr. Jekyll and this Mr. Hyde guy are, and, basically not let readers know until the end that it's the same person. But today, everyone really knows that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person. I don't even need to really put a spoiler warning that there. Everyone knows that. I was still not sure exactly the circumstances of that, so I knew basically this doctor transforms into this Mr. Hyde guy, but I didn't know why, like if it's something to do with the moon or what. So that part was a mystery, but as to the whole plot of the book, I knew. So I think these books are kind of almost doomed to fail because, for instance, there's this part pretty early on where they're examining this letter from Dr. Jekyll and this other letter from Mr. Hyde, and they're like, this was written by the same person. So they're like, oh, Dr. Jekyll must have written this and just forged this other letter in Mr. Hyde's name. But of course, to us, since we know it's the same guy, we know it's the same person. How can you not tell? It's obvious. Robert Stevenson is basically giving you the end of the plot. But to readers who read this the first time without knowing who Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are, obviously this would maybe be a surprise. To us, though, who are familiar with the story, it's not a surprise. So it just doesn't really work. Written as a mystery, it doesn't work because it's the worst kept mystery in the world. We know Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same guy. So reading this book, about 80-90% through with it, I was just not really enjoying it too much. It's just kind of boring because it's like written as a mystery, but I already know how it's going to end, really. I know Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same guy. But finally, toward the end, when it started revealing who Mr. Hyde was and how Dr. Jekyll had this transformation and how he became Mr. Hyde and why and how he was trying to like fight that process. The afterword of the book, I think, mentions that this book kind of precedes like modern psychology. So it's a book about like duality of man. Before that was like a real common psychological topic. So I understand all that, like how the book could have been innovative, especially for its time, and like precede modern psychology and all this stuff, and examines these themes about duality of man and good versus evil. So there's a lot of themes here that I think readers could take and also like critics could commend the book for. But as to actually enjoying the book, I didn't think it was really an enjoyable read. I wasn't thoroughly entertained with it. So honestly, I thought I enjoyed Treasure Island more. I would still probably recommend Treasure Island before this one. However, this is a real short book, and I also think it is cool to actually read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So actually reading where that came from. It's the same thing with Dracula, reading the Dracula story by Bram Stoker. It was really cool actually seeing that name, Count Dracula, on the page, and Professor Van Helsing. And same thing with Frankenstein, actually reading that name in the book that made it famous. So all of these books are definitely worthwhile. I think everyone should read Frankenstein, Dracula, I guess, even though I didn't really enjoy it. And I would say read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as well. But since everyone was saying it's their favorite book by Robert Stevenson, I was kind of underwhelmed by it. So if you're going in thinking this is going to be one of the best books in the world, I'd say maybe disappointed. However, it's a short book, so it's good to read to catch up on your 2023 reading goals, or whatever year it is when you watch this. And it's such an iconic character and cultural icons, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So it's cool to actually read where all that comes from. So I do definitely recommend it in that way, but from personal reading and enjoying value, it just really didn't do much for me. So I would give it, I'm torn between 3 or 4 stars. I guess I'm going to be generous and give it 4 stars. It's a short read, it's pretty easy to read, and it's a cultural icon. So all those things combined, it's definitely worth reading. Is it a masterpiece? Maybe in its time, yes, but I think over time that's kind of lost its value. I don't know, there just wasn't quite enough in it to make me love the book. I did like the ending though, but still I wish the book would have had something more. Still, overall, pretty good book, definitely cultural icons, so Robert Stevenson did great there. Also, another thing, Robert Stevenson writing Treasure Island. Treasure Island really is like the Mac Daddy of all pirate books. Everything you know about pirate books really, I think, comes from Treasure Island, like Maps to Buried Treasure and Pieces of Eight and Davy Jones' Locker and Shiver Me Timber and Pirates with Peg Legs and all this stuff. It all comes from Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And this book, Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, again, another cultural icon. So Robert Stevenson was really the man. I mean, he came up with so much that is just so popular today that is just such common knowledge, like pirates having peg legs. Robert Stevenson is the one who really popularized all that. So from that standpoint, as a writer, I think we need to give respect to our elders. This guy came up with so much that is definitely cool. So he deserves respect from that standpoint, and I think it is also important to read the originals because he's the one who came up with this stuff. So he came up with Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, and he came up with a lot of the pirate stuff with Treasure Island. So this all does make me more interested in reading more by Robert Stevenson. Pretty much anything he's written, I think at this point probably should be a must-read. Because obviously the guy was just really inventive, imaginative, and influential. So definitely worth reading. Definitely worth respecting. So I respect and recommend him for that. Last of all, this is not a wrap-up or review per se, but we need to have a discussion about Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. So Brandon Sanderson is not on the top 1000 list, fortunately for me. I do have actually 3 signed books by him, which is real cool. As a writer, I really like Brandon Sanderson. I mean, like as an actual occupation writer, as a person, I think Brandon Sanderson is real cool. It's like, I wish I could be Brandon Sanderson. He's always like signing like hundreds of autographs. So I just love that. I wish I could do that. He has a parrot. I love birds, obviously. He's really accessible. He's like on YouTube and everything. So he's just to me, Brandon Sanderson is like an author's author. He's like the author I would like to be. I would like to be him. However, I am not much a fan of fantasy at all. I mean, it's like one of my least favorite genres. However, I wanted to read some Brandon Sanderson, and so I started with Way of Kings, because Way of Kings is the first book in, I don't even know the series title, The Stormlight Archives. So I kind of thought that was like Brandon Sanderson's magnum opus, was The Stormlight Archives. So I was like, oh, this is book 1, so I'll just start here. Later on, I was watching like YouTube videos like Brandon Sanderson reading order lists, and without fail, Way of Kings was listed at like 12th or 14th in the order that you should read Brandon Sanderson. And of course, it's the first one that I chose to read. And I am already like 200 or 250 pages into it, but 200 pages out of like a 1200 page book. So I'm not even quite a quarter way into the book yet. A problem I was having with this book is Brandon Sanderson throws so much lore at readers, but he doesn't explain anything. So it's like he'll mention something, but he won't explain what that is for maybe like 200 pages, in which case I'm already going to forget about that thing. And along that time, he introduces all these other things. So in this book, it's just like sentence after sentence. It's like, oh, to understand this, you need to go back and read book 3. And to understand this, you need to go and read book 5 and page 556. And the next sentence, for this reference, you need to read this other book and go to page 712. And I just do not have the mind for this. I would not remember all these details and get all these references. However, I understand part of the reason I don't understand this is because this is like the 12th or 14th book that you should probably read by Brandon Sanderson. If you read them in order, you would understand a lot more of the references as it goes. And when you finally read this book, you wouldn't really need to have these things explained to you because you would know what like a shard plate is or whatever. But me, I read it and I'm just like, okay, what's this thing? Are you going to explain what that is? No, he's just going to keep writing and throwing more stuff at readers. So, because of that, it's real just difficult for me to really get into it. And again, I just do not much like fantasy at all. So I like Brandon Sanderson as a writer, like as a person, I want to be Brandon Sanderson. And as an actual writer, like the craft of writing, I think he's a pretty good writer as well. However, the main point I need to talk about is what do I do now? Because I'm at a point where basically reading 250 pages, I'm just kind of tired of the book. I'm making really slow progress. So I read maybe like, I don't know, 5 pages like a week maybe, and I'm even slowing down from there, so I may start reading just like 5 pages a month. And this is a 1,200 page book or something, so reading it at the pace I am, I would not finish this book for like 3 years. And I just don't really know what to do. So I mean, it's like, do I go back and read book 1, like the first book people recommend, and start reading them in order? Or not, because again, I just do not really like fantasy. But if I do that, what do I do with this book? I'm 250 pages into it. That's a nice chunk of the book. I would say, you know, just finish this book and then go back and read book 1. But again, I would have to read this book for like 3 or 4 years to finish it. Do I just DNF this book and go back and read book 1? Or do I just quit Brandon Sanderson entirely because I'm not big on fantasy? I would also like to be able to do booktube videos about it, you know? So like a non-fantasy reader's like opinion of the Cosmere or whatever. But at the same time, there are so many booktubers who actually like really love Brandon Sanderson where my videos would not be able to compare to theirs. I mean, they have like whole tier rankings of all of Brandon Sanderson's books, and talking about all of them in detail, and I'm just 250 pages into this book and not really getting it, and I'm not big on fantasy, and I am a slow reader. I would never be able to read all of Brandon Sanderson's books in my lifetime, just especially at the pace I go. So I just don't really know what to do. Do I just DNF the book? Do I quit Brandon Sanderson entirely? So for now, I've basically just put this book aside. I don't have it on my currently reading pile. I've not put it away though, so I've not like formally DNF'd this book, but I've put it aside and I just don't really know what to do with it. I mean, do I just DNF it? Or do I still keep kind of chipping away at it, just like 10 pages here and there? Or what? So feel free to just comment and chime in and tell me what you think. I mean, would you really want me to even bother reading this book and trying to give my opinions of it and give my opinions of Brandon Sanderson's books? Like go back and read them in order if I can? And it'd be so slow probably, and I don't know. And part of the thing is Brandon Sanderson is so popular, so it's like I know if I do reviews of his books, that may get my channel some views. But again, it goes back to there are others who read his books and get into them where their videos would be far more entertaining and informative than mine. So, I don't know. Basically, for now, I'm just putting it aside. And I don't know. I don't know exactly when I'll have to put the call in on this book and just finally say, you know what, I'm done with the book. I'm close, though. In case you're interested, my review of Treasure Island by Robert Stevenson is right here, and my review of Dracula by Bram Stoker is right here. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!